Britain is in a pitiful condition. The economy falters, burdened by high taxes and excess regulation. Public services no longer serve the actual public. Culturally, Britain is coming apart, strained by mass immigration, a crumbling sense of identity, and a demographic transformation that risks making our country unrecognisable. None of this is inevitable. The dire condition of the country is a consequence of abysmal policy, inept leadership, and an administrative class that's lost all accountability to the people it claims to represent. But putting Britain back on the right path will take much more than merely a parliamentary majority. The policies needed to renew our country will face fierce resistance from an administrative state determined to prevent their implementation. Unless we have a plan to overcome opposition from unelected officials and activist judges, national recovery won't be possible. We don't just need a change of government in Britain. National recovery means we must fundamentally change the way Britain's governed. Milestones is a plan outlining in detail what needs to be done. We must begin by recognising that Britain has been subjected to a leftist assault on our way of life over the past 30 years. The leftist revolution? For the past 3 decades, our nation has endured an ideological onslaught, a revolution cloaked as progress. Men, we've been told, can become women. The ancient legal principle of equality under the law has been cast aside, and those with protected characteristics are now treated preferentially. Today's state bodies are legally required to tilt the scales against white Britons under the guise of equality. People have been sent to prison for their privately expressed opinions. Our history, once a source of pride, has been rewritten to demoralise us. The country that produced Shakespeare, Newton, Brunel, Austen, is not allowed any claim to exceptionalism other than exceptional wickedness. Young people in Britain, a nation that led the fight to abolish the slave trade, are taught we were its chief practitioners. Films and books are no longer produced to entertain, but to lecture and scold. Over the past generation, our elites have not merely politicised culture and our past, they've upended our system of government, turning democracy into technocracy as power has been devolved to experts. The Bank of England, granted independence, presided over a banking crisis and lost control of inflation. A climate change committee shapes energy policy, driving up costs and destroying what remained of our manufacturing. An environment agency halts development, Ofcom polices speech, and the information commissar dictates how businesses handle customer data. Judges decide whether we tap oil and gas reserves, or courts, not the free market, set wages. The leftist revolution began with Tony Blair's 1997 landslide victory. Though Blair himself served as Prime Minister for only 10 of the past 28 years, every administration since him, Labour and Conservative, has held essentially the same core assumptions. They've governed in the belief that experts are infallible, that our rights are not the distinctive product of our island inheritance, but are universal. The core Blairite belief is that human nature is itself universal. People from any background, interchangeable. This is why they opened our borders, allowing millions of immigrants in, believing that anyone can become British or even English, Scottish or Welsh. None of this was chosen by us. None of it is based on what is good and true. Nothing about it has served us well. The unelected officials and judges that run Britain have run the country into the ground. Now, we might imagine dispassionate bureaucrats crafting public policy for the common good, but the truth is grimly different. Britain has suffered a catastrophic decline. Living standards have stagnated for 2 decades. Between 2008 and 2022, median income rose 7.2%. Over the previous 14 years, median income rose by 38%. The UK per person output was once comparable to that of the United States. Today, UK per capita output has fallen behind that of Mississippi, the poorest state in America. High taxes and regulation have produced economic sclerosis, despite masses of monetary stimulus used to try to generate growth. The UK now has £3 trillion of public debt, equal to about 100% of the value of all the goods and services that the country produces every year. 30 years ago, our public debt was a modest 25 to 30% of GDP. Since creating an Office of Budget Responsibility, we've squandered public money irresponsibly on COVID lockdowns, green energy bondoogles, and before that, bank bailouts. Public spending is now 45% of GDP, compared to a mere 37% when Tony Blair began as Prime Minister. The NHS, run by its own unaccountable bureaucracy, is failing. Waiting lists reached 6.2 million by February 2025, 1 in 11 Britons, while A&E delays spiral, with 61,000 people languishing over 12 hours in January, 21 times the pre-COVID waiting levels. 1 in 27 people in Britain today is an immigrant that has arrived in the past 2 years, a staggering 2.5 million newcomers in 2023 and 2024 alone, 190,000 of them illegal. Far from the brightest and the best, many of them are low-skilled, poorly educated, and with a high propensity to commit crime. Many non-Western immigrants offer little economic benefit to our country, as Dutch data grimly confirms, yet bring with them issues of cultural incompatibility. 20 years ago, Muslims made up about 3% of the UK population. Since then, their share of the population has risen to 6%, and it's expected to double again over the next 20 years. While most Muslims live peaceful, law-abiding lives, the extremism of a significant number needs to be confronted. Britain's armed forces are a shadow of their former selves. The Royal Navy's fleet has shrunk from 79 vessels in 1995 to a mere 28 today. The Army's tanks from over 400 to 100. The RAF's aircraft from 800 to 564. Personnel may have halved from 300,000 to 138,000 since the mid-1990s. Quality may have risen, but quantity has collapsed. In recent years, almost every public body in the country, no matter how ineffective they are at delivering on their core mission, has found the time to promote a woke ideology, prioritizing social justice and historical revisionism. Police forces have found the time to promote inclusivity but not catch criminals. The NHS spends millions on diversity, equity and inclusion directors, while millions languish on waiting lists. Museums, funded by the British taxpayer, present exhibits that take every opportunity to show Britain in a bad light. It's no surprise that patriotism amongst young people has been in precipitous decline. What is to be done? Public discontent is not enough. We need a strategy to channel this discontent into support for a coherent alternative. Nor is it enough to list a menu of policies that we wish to see implemented. If any of the required policy prescriptions are to be implemented, we first need to be prepared to radically change the way that our country is run. The resistance to reform from the administrative state will be fierce. The activism of obstructive judges will be intense. To save Britain from further decline, we need a plan to deal with both. Milestone number 1, secure public administration. To establish control over the machinery of the state, an incoming administration first needs to recognise that without preemptive action, it'll have no control over Whitehall. Ministers won't run their departments, they will be run by their departments. An incoming government must use the royal prerogative and statutory powers of our Auditing Council to convert the legitimacy of winning a democratic mandate into authority and power over officials to get things done. This means insisting on the King's formal approval of specific orders in Council at Privy Council, alongside emergency legislation, as a condition for forming a government. An incoming administration needs to assume office armed with an ordering council that amends the Civil Service Management Code and emergency legislation to amend the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act of 2010, such that Ministers have authority to dismiss permanent secretaries and director generals deemed obstructive, subject to clear justification process. We need to enable ministers to issue binding directives to officials, overriding their discretionary resistance. We need to allow ministers to appoint external outsiders into senior roles within the civil service so that processes can't be used to obstruct them. Secondly, we need a department of the Prime Minister from day one. The Cabinet is no longer an effective instrument of government, but a Potemkin charade. Cabinet meetings are scripted, with officials making many of the real decisions beforehand. Actual power increasingly lies in the weekly meetings of permanent secretaries. Chaired by the Cabinet Secretary, it coordinates and decides public policy to all practical purposes, without ministerial oversight. Worse, the system of administration centred around the Cabinet Office is dysfunctional. The triumvirate of departments at the centre of government, the Cabinet Office, Number 10, and the Treasury, lacks strategic coherence. We need a coherent centre, not unlike Australia's Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet. In place of the shroud of cabinet government centred around the Cabinet Office, we need to create a department of the Prime Minister via Order in Council, consolidating most cabinet functions, e.g. policy coordination, national security, and select Treasury responsibilities, e.g. strategic budget oversight. The Department of the Prime Minister would serve as a unified command centre, aligning public administration with the government's electoral mandate. Under the Ministers of the Crown Act 1975, an order can transfer and reassign functions without primary legislation. We should announce the creation of a department of the Prime Minister on day one, with a transition plan completed within 30 days, modelled on Canada's Privy Council Office restructuring. Next, we need to close a third of government departments, and do this in month one. The UK government currently operates 24 ministerial departments. We need to close many of them down. Argentina's President Javier Milei reduced his government from 18 to 9 ministries in 2023, cutting costs by 30% and boosting efficiency. We must dissolve at least 8 departments, approximately 1/3, including the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, and others identified as redundant. We must reassign essential functions, e.g. energy regulation, to the Treasury, via Orders in Council under the Ministers of the Crown Act, which permits departmental dissolution and function transfer without parliamentary approval. This too would be done by presenting the King with a pre-drafted order on day one, listing departments to be abolished and specifying function reallocations. Parliament would need to be informed post facto, with staff redeployment or redundancy processes undertaken within about 30 days. Next, we need to pack the House of Lords. Without getting sidetracked into a debate about reform of the House of Lords, an incoming administration should prepare to pack the House of Lords with hundreds of new peers to secure a majority for its agenda. Milestone 2. Securing our borders. Within 24 hours, Orders in Council should be issued to set country-specific entry quotas, tightening visa rules, speeding up deportations, and toughening up indefinite leave to remain criteria. An emergency deport first, appeal later law is needed to amend the Tribunals, Courts and Enforcement Act of 2007 and allow appeals to remain in Britain to be heard from within a third country. Judges will push back, so 3 emergency laws are needed to limit the scope of judicial review, allow the Lord Chancellor to dismiss senior judges whose rulings are based on their activism rather than strict legal interpretation, and return oversight over judicial appointments to the Lord Chancellor. Milestone 3. Undoing a legislative legacy. The Blairites' toxic legislative legacy needs to be cleaned up. The Human Rights Act of 1998, tying us to the European Convention on Human Rights, must be replaced by a British Sovereignty Act. The Communications Act of 2003, stifling free speech, requires a Free Speech Act to protect expression, limited only by common law incitement. The Climate Change Act of 2008 should be repealed with a Climate Change Repeal Act, unlocking oil, gas and nuclear development through planning reform. Most crucially, We must replace the Equality Act of 2010 with a Meritocracy Act, requiring merit-based employment practice across the public sector. Milestone 4. Unleashing economic growth. Britain will continue to decline without economic growth. Post-Brexit opportunities to reduce red tape have been squandered. Governments have used monetary stimulus to generate the growth their excessive regulation has stifled. A bold approach is needed to unlock growth with a Planning Deregulation Act to simplify environmental impact assessments, scrapping most Greenbelt rules, ending affordable housing mandates, and fast-tracking infrastructure as nationally significant projects, and remove rigid design codes. A Labour Market Flexibility Act is needed to allow 90-day at-will dismissal periods for new hires. Milestone 5. Reducing public spending. Reducing government spending, currently 45% of GDP, to 40% of GDP, would mean taking public spending to where it was before COVID. This can be achieved over the course of a 5-year parliament and would require something like 170 billion cuts in public spending. This would be done by closing 8 departments, 30 billion annual savings, disability benefit reform, 12 billion savings, universal credit reform, 30 billion savings, housing benefit reform, 15 billion savings, cutting the public sector workforce, 24 billion savings, instituting a 2-year public sector pay freeze, 8 billion savings, a Doge-style audit, 25 billion savings, ending most overseas aid, 13 billion savings, and scrapping non-essential quangos, 13 billion savings. Milestone 6. Tax cuts. Tax cuts must be strategic. 170 billion of cuts in spending would allow 40 billion tax cuts, on top of which there would be an estimated 60 billion in growth-driven tax revenue as a result of the radical deregulation outlined under Milestone 4. Against that, an extra 30 billion is needed for defence, Milestone 8, which I'll come on to, meaning that there's scope for about 70 billion of tax cuts in the first Parliament. What would one do with 70 billion tax cuts? Scrap tariffs, 5 billion, boosting household budgets right away. Over 5 years, we should lift the 40% income tax threshold to 57,000. That would mean about 40 billion of foregone revenue. That would aid about 5.2 million households. We should also ditch the 45% upper income tax rate, which would be largely revenue neutral. We should cut corporation tax from 20%, that would be about 14 billion of forsaken revenue, and VAT to 18.5%, about 10 billion forsaken revenue, aiming for 15% VAT long term, with VAT eventually becoming a local sales tax over 2 parliaments. Milestone 7. Public service reform. A Parental Choice Act should allow parents to allocate their child's share of local authority funding to a school of their choice. For healthcare, we need to lift the 7,500 cap on trainee doctors to address shortages. We need to diversify providers by commissioning private hospitals to treat more patients, abolish the purchaser-provider split, and let private firms compete to treat more people directly. Milestone 8. Strengthen defence, realign foreign policy. We should seek free trade and defence with our Anglosphere allies, America, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. To be a reliable ally, we need to invest seriously in defence, raising defence spending to 3% of GDP over a parliament. This would allow us to maintain 4 divisions, 2 for European defence, 1 for home defence, and 1 to partner with our Anglosphere allies. This should be accompanied by investment in new tech and a radical reform of defence procurement. Milestone 9. Remigration. Entry into the UK, like citizenship of our country, is a privilege, not a guarantee, and both can be revoked. We must automatically deport non-naturalised criminals jailed for over 3 months. We also need to put in place the legal architecture to allow citizenship to be taken away from both naturalised citizens and those born in Britain, if necessary on a large scale, where they have failed to assimilate, supported terrorism, or endorsed radical Islamist views incompatible with Western norms. To find out more detail about this very detailed granular proposal, search for milestones either at The Telegraph, which serialized my essay, or on Substack, where I've published it. Thank you for listening.